Hi, I'm Matthew Herzberg, and this is the Myopia Mindset. This is your weekly check-in for all things motivation, inspiration, and education when it comes to your path to success towards myopia management. And this episode is part of our Vision by Design 2025 series, in which we are highlighting some of the more noteworthy lectures and speakers that are coming up at the conference. Vision by Design is the Super Bowl of myopia management. It's where you need to be if you're doing ortho-K or myopia management. It's going on from October 22nd through the 25th in October in Palm Beach. AAOMC.org is where you go to find out more information. And I have assembled returning champions of the podcast to talk about consultation pearls. Each one of these gentlemen are orthokeratologists, myopia management specialists. They're each speaking at boot camp. I'm going to start with introductions. I've got Matthew Martin in Auburn, Michigan. Matthew, you're an outdoorsman. Are you a bow hunter or a rifle guy?
I'm absolutely a bow hunter because I love the quiet and I love the beauty of the early November weather.
Awesome. And I've also got Dwight Barnes. He is a super Star Wars nerd. One of my fellow people here. I named my son after an obscure Star Wars character. Dwight, are you a fan of all things Star Wars or just the canon movies?
It's mostly the canon movies, and maybe showing my age, the earlier ones better than the later ones, but they're all fun in their own way. You know, I like the whole Star Wars universe and all of that. I think I can have fun even with the newer ones from time to time.
Right on. And I also have Dr. Paul Levine. Paul, you are an orthokeratologist by day and a musician at night. You play in a band. What is your instrument?
Depends. I have a couple of different bands that I'm involved in. I play the acoustic guitar primarily in one and bass guitar in the other.
Awesome. And for each one of you, if people have questions about anything we talk about in this episode, we'll start with Matthew again. Matthew, how can they get in touch with you on the internet?
I am super easy to get a hold of. You can send an email to Auburn Optical, that's AUBURN Optical @gmail.com. That comes directly to me, and I will answer your emails. And I'm stoked if you want to contact me because this is the best specialty in all of eye care.
And Dwight, your contact information.
Yep. The best way would be either email. My professional email is drdwight, like Dr. Dwight, @caryfamilyeyecare.com. Cary is spelled Cary. And that's an easy way to get in touch with me. The other way would be to hit me up on LinkedIn. Fortunately, there are not that many Dwight Barneses out there. It's not a super common first name. And finding me on there is pretty simple. And again, just like Matthew, I love talking to seasoned and new practitioners and everything in between.
Yeah. And Paul?
Oh, the best way to reach me would be sending an email to Matthew Martin at Auburn Optical. No, seriously, my best email for me is plevine, PLEVINEOD @gmail.com.
Awesome. And if you love what we're doing here at the Myopia Mindset, please consider becoming a paid supporter of the podcast. You get early episodes, tons of bonus content, and all of that can be found at myopiamindset.com. You can contact us, myopiamindset@gmail.com. All right, gentlemen, let's get started. Matthew Martin, why don't you kick us off? Because this topic was originally panel and do a deep dive into consultation. So where do we need to start?
Yeah, so Dwight and Paul and I have all discussed this, and I think it's really amazing when you think about the fact that consultation is where the entire myopia management battle is won or lost. Because patients come in, they're not sure maybe what they want, maybe they think they want to do myopia management, maybe they don't. The consultation is where you have your chance to convert them, to educate them, to get them to understand the importance of it, and implement what you think is going to be potentially the best choice for their child, but also give them some choices on how we want to go about pursuing that. And I know Dwight and I were discussing this. Dwight, what are your thoughts on how much is won or lost in just the consultation aspect?
I think almost everything is won or lost. And I think I've learned that more and more gradually over the years. If you skimp on a part of it, or if you try to rush a part of it too much, or you try to squeeze it in where it doesn't fit, you lose something and your conversion rate's going to go down. And, conversion rate's good for everybody involved when it's high. It's good for us because we want to have more people purchasing our services, right? It's good for our practice. It's good for the patient because if they're a myopic child, we already know they need it. It's our job to help their parent understand that they need it, right? So in a big way, they're not purchasing orthokeratology or myopia control. They're purchasing you as the practitioner, and that's your opportunity to really educate them, show them that not only do you know what you're talking about, but you're passionate about what you're talking about, because that matters, because then they'll believe that you'll jump in there with both feet and really try your best to get a great outcome for them. And then if you are fortunate enough to have a certified myopia navigator, that's a team member who is well-trained and certified in understanding what we do as myopia management specialists, that also gives them a good chance to meet that person so that they can understand that person on your team is also their ally in this.
Right. I love it. When we talk about the consultation process, I'm wondering what the unique things are that make your practice and your consultation special, because we have so many different qualifiers here. Do you charge? Do you not charge? How much do you set up in the exam? I've talked to doctors who, they start pitching right in the exam. I have known doctors who are pinched for time, so they do as little in the exam as possible and seed into the consult. Paul, let's start with you on this question. So give us the dynamics or the bare bones of the consultation for you. Do you start talking about it in the exam and move to the consult? And then what does that look like?
Well, okay, so there's a couple of different avenues that present itself. So one is when somebody might not necessarily come in wanting myopia management. They might just come in for a regular exam, and that's when the concept needs to be introduced that, by the way, there's lots of things we can do nowadays different than what we used to do, and we're much more proactive about trying to slow down or halt the progression of these, myopic kids, and so they're just now kind of finding out that, oh, there's something that we can do besides just get a new pair of glasses and stronger ones whenever they need them. That's what happened when I was a kid, so that's kind of where you might make sort of a short introduction to what's available. And then if it's something that they really find them, want more questions, want more, and are more interested to learn more and dig deeper, then we might have to schedule a time to come back in when we can really put enough time to be able to do a proper consultation, but we're planting some seeds there. It's totally different when someone comes in for myopia management. If they were referred by another doctor or by a parent of a friend, or, this kid's child does this with you and we're interested in it. So that's a whole different animal, because now they're coming in already with a general understanding that I want to try to do whatever I can to prevent this thing from getting worse. So, I guess it really just depends on how they end up in my chair, and like Dwight said, you have to be careful about rushing, because, they need to feel like they're your main focus at that time, and that you're not in 6 different directions bouncing from room to room to room. So if I just don't have time to really properly introduce the concept in a routine exam, per se, I'll just kind of give them the bullet. And then I like to give them printed, information, because it does get a little overwhelming, and then we'll have them back and schedule something in short order, not in 3 months from now, but like, let's see if we can get you in here in the next couple of weeks.
Right. And you have designated time slots for those consults. At Herzberg Optical, our consults took place in the after hours. We were in the office at 9 o'clock at night, and sometimes even 10 o'clock at night, we would finally be done. That was our peak period for doing consults. So do you have dedicated time set aside for that, Paul?
If you're asking me, no, I don't, because my schedule is just too fluid. So, and I'm really busy, but we find the best places where we can put stuff. And I may have other things going on, but I can delegate other things to staff. So I'm really invested in the myopia consult.
Gotcha.
And part of that gets delegated as well, too. I mean, I don't do 100% of the entire consult.
Okay, so you have staff that also get into the consult as well.
Yeah.
Matthew, do you do the entire consult yourself? Do you bring staff into it? And how does your process work?
Yeah, I think Paul makes a good point. So much depends on where you're deriving the patient from. If it's a referral, obviously they're going to be prepared ahead of time. Today, I had 2 patients come in. They were kids. We ran myopia master on them. Neither of them looked like they were going to have big prescriptions, but I did explain to mom, myopia management is my specialty. This is what I do. Your child's going to be about a -2. A -2 doesn't necessarily need myopia management, but I'm going to give you some information on it so you have it. Some parents don't want their kid to be myopic at all, and I'm not about to tell them that I'm not willing to help them if they decide to go that route. So part of it is, I think, the point of creating those leads, and we talked about this in a different podcast. It's important to be thinking about these things ahead, even if the child doesn't have a significant prescription now. Maybe they will in a year or 2 years or 3 years, or I'll meet a parent whose kids are tiny, and I'm like, well, you haven't had kids yet, but you're nearsighted, and when you do, I want you to make sure that we see them between 4 and 5, 6 years old. And I'm planting seeds for people who haven't even had kids yet, sort of as preparation so that they start hearing the word myopia management. They start knowing that it's something that we're going to talk about ahead of time. So do I do most of your question originally, and again, I get in trouble because I get pulled aside on separate topics. I've been scolded for that. But do I do most of the evaluation myself? Absolutely, I do. But much like Paul, I will do the bones of it. This is what's going on. This is your kid's going to be a -10. We need to do something about it. Here are your options: ortho K, peripheral defocus contact lenses, low dose atropine, perhaps a combination. This is what I think we should do. I'm going to turn you over to this staff member who's knowledgeable to help fill in some of those gaps.
Gotcha.
Right. So if I have a staff member, a myopia management person, or a navigator to help do that, that makes a big difference. And I think Paul, Dwight, and I often rely on our staff. Does that sound true to you, Dwight?
It does. Yeah, there's definitely some similarities from both of you guys. And it's interesting when we do this to find, with so many similarities, where are there differences? So one thing that I do a little different is I do have designated spots in my schedule. Now, if I can accommodate somebody at a different time, I'm willing to do it. There's different thoughts on where you should make those spots in your schedule. And I've discussed this at times, I know, with Matthew, but in my clinic, I started a long time back, the certain exam slots that were not as much in demand. And I was like, fine, I'm just going to block those out. Now, some do the absolute opposite. They want it to hurt. But I pick a couple that, on a few spots throughout the week that are not as much in demand. And I have the staff block them off. And if it's not filled, they'll open it up the day before, and we stay pretty busy, so we'll get that blocked. In terms of presenting the information and doing the consult, I think it looks a little different in my office because we have, well, I don't know, I guess, Paul, if you have other docs, but we have 2 other docs in our office. One is my wife. She's a co-owner. The other is my associate doc, Dr. Logan. And neither of them do myopia management, but they're certainly on board with the need for it. So when it's my patient, and let's say it wasn't referred in, it's somebody who I'm just presenting the information that this is beneficial to your child, this is something we should do, I will give a little bit more information, assuming I'm running pretty much on schedule. If it's one of the other 2 docs, they keep it pretty basic, right? But we have brochures that we printed up that have a lot of good information, and they'll say, hey, we have a staff member that's going to help you out and follow up with it. And regardless, when we're done, we will go find typically Bryce, who's a certified myopia navigator in my clinic, and just try to do a handoff, just like we would with optical, right? And that transfer of authority is really important. I let them know, hey, this person knows what she is doing, and she is going to take over from here and provide more education and more information and help you get scheduled for that evaluation if we're not doing it the same day. So much like I'd take them out to the optical and say, hey, this is Priscilla. She's an expert here. She is going to help make sure that your new glasses match exactly what I need you to have and make sure that you see great like you did in my exam room. I'll hand off and say, hey, this is Bryce. She's got tons of training in this. She's really great. You'll love her. She's going to give you some more information, some printed material, and she's going to take some measurements and help you guys get scheduled. And that lets them know, I mean, she does know what she's doing, and then that gives that transfer of authority there.
Gotcha.
And the other place where I use her is that I'm like Matthew, I do most of that evaluation myself, but at the very end, when I've gathered whatever information I need and imparted the most important information, I hand that off to my navigator so that she can kind of go over the paperwork and the fees and get them signed up and all this messy stuff that I don't really like doing. So
Yeah, you want to do the fun part, right? You want to
exactly.
talk about, you want to talk about the parts you're most
Yeah.
passionate about, and that's what I want to go to next. We'll go to Paul to start us off on this. When we're talking about myopia, when we're talking about our treatment modalities that we're going to recommend, like let's start there. Like, how do you go about that process when talking to parents in the consult?
I can't imagine that what I do is all that different than what everybody else that, that does this does, because there aren't, there are finite options available. But I'll just spend a little bit of time explaining essentially the three different options, there. And when I say three, an option is always to not do anything. Like they have to know that there's no force here. So I'll tell them, glasses are really great at correcting your eyesight so you can see clearly. They don't do a terrifically good job of, affecting the progression rate of nearsightedness. However, there are some eyeglass lenses that are coming, and we don't have access to them yet in the United States, but they are being used in Canada and in Europe and elsewhere, that are showing really great signs of helping. But all we really can use here in the States is a multifocal or a bifocal type eyeglass. And that's certainly better than using a single vision distance only lens. But I find that it has, marginal utility in controlling nearsighted progression. Then I'll talk about, there's a pharmaceutical option called low dose atropine. And of course, I'll go into what that is, what atropine really is, what it was intended for, but how we've morphed it into something that is much less side effecty, but still capable of managing myopia to a certain degree. Then I'll talk about the multifocal, soft contact lens options and how well those are working according to the studies and in the industry. And then I'll talk to them about orthokeratology. And I probably, if I'm being honest, probably push that one more than anything else. Not just because I like doing it more, but because I think of all the available options, it does work the best. And especially in a younger child, that, I think the parents find an appeal in the fact that the lenses are only used in the home. The lenses are only used under supervision. They're not rolling around in sand pits and mud bogs and God knows what with something in their eyes at that moment. So I definitely steer them toward the Ortho-K, but mainly just because I think that it is the best option,
Right.
and I let them know that I'm biased.
I love that. Matthew Martin, I'm sure you're also in that camp, Ortho-K all the way.
Okay, well, first things first. Anyone who's listening to this podcast, if you reach out to me at auburnoptical@gmail.com, I have a myopia management basics sheet that simply says, these are the options we have: low dose atropine, peripheral defocus contact lenses, Ortho-K. And that sheet goes out to anyone who's nearsighted, anyone who has nearsighted kids, anyone who knows anyone who's got nearsighted kids. And it's a great jumping off point to have a conversation. And then when I'm doing my evaluation, much like Paul, I'm an Ortho-K guy. Do I use my sight, VTI, Natural View, the peripheral defocus contact lenses? Yes, I do. Do I use low dose atropine? I do if I have to. But Ortho-K, with the amount of peripheral defocus it creates, and sometimes we're creating like 5, 6, 7 diopters of peripheral defocus in these kids. It stops myopia growth or axial length growth like so dramatically. And so when I'm talking to parents, I have this sheet and I'm like, this is an option, this is an option. This is probably not the best choice. So it comes down to these two. And then I always circle Ortho-K if the child is going to be a good candidate. And I tell parents very, very straightforward, this is most every parent's first choice. If you don't want to do ortho K, that's fine. I get it. But this is what undeniably parents choose in my office and seem to be happiest with. Dwight, do you feel that, and I'm sure Paul's the same way, do you feel like of all the choices, ortho K seems to be the one that people like the most?
It is, and once in a while, human psychology is such an interesting thing, and we run into it all the time in eye care because we're dealing with people, right? The people who tend to not want to do ortho K, by and large, in my case, is sometimes when the child is very young, and very young kids can do it, but sometimes there's a preconceived notion for the parents they can't. And sometimes we can break through that and say, no, really, I have a lot of kids that do it this age. This is how it works. And maybe we have a little more parental involvement. So, and sometimes that works. And sometimes they've kind of just made their mind up. And if they have, that's okay. I think the only wrong thing is to do nothing for myopia control. And I tell them that, right? I say, based on everything I've got here, I do think that there is a best option. And way more often than not, that best option is ortho K. Once in a great while, it's not, but more often than not, it's ortho K. And then I say, but the best option really is the one that your child's going to do consistently every single day. And that consistency is going to lead to the best results. And so if there is something that's going to keep a child from doing it, that's rare in the young kids because the parent, they're under the parent's control, but a lot of times if they don't, sometimes they're coming back for a follow-up 6 months later and they do want to switch to it. Sometimes I'll even kind of say, great, we can do this, but you were referred in by your friend, Aaron or whatever. And, Aaron does ortho K and he does really well. You should actually go back and have a conversation or something like that. So we do a lot of it. And much like Paul and Matthew were saying, the results are good with a lot of these, but they tend to be the best in general with ortho K. I mean, it really just is a phenomenal technology. And now that we know so much more about it, we design them better, they work better, and you get a whole bunch of those kids with those flat axial length curves that just kind of flatten out and don't change really anymore, or only change at the age expected rate, and just amazingly stable year after year, which is a really good feeling. And I certainly bring up those graphs and share it with the parents and get a high five here and there, and it's fun.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question is how big of a role does axial length play for you guys? Because obviously axial length is going to be part of the standard of care in the very near future. I mean, attend Pat and Randy's lecture at Vision by Design, and you'll hear some amazing stuff about what they've been doing with axial length and how that's been influencing their work. So what do we do with that axial length information? Because a lot of the new to myopia management docs are finding it intimidating that there's this piece of equipment they have to buy and this piece of equipment they have to buy, these changes they have to make, and this thing they have to do. So how does axial length play a role in your consultation? Matthew, we'll start with you.
Yeah, we talked about this on an earlier podcast. For me, axial length has become more important than diopters. And Dwight and I had a conversation about this, and he's got a fantastic analogy that I'm going to kick to him in a moment. But I've gotten where I almost don't really care what the power is. If the axial length measurement has been slowed down or even stopped, that's a win for me. So for me, the axial length has become more and more important. And Dwight, what is your really good explanation that you gave to me the other day? And I stole it. And I've lost it at this moment, but hit us with it if you would.
So I really hope what I'm remembering is the same when I imparted to you, because it sounds like whatever I said to you is really smart, and I'm going to feel bad if what I say now isn't. But one of the conversations I have, because you do have to rewire it. They're used to saying, what is my child's number, right? Is it a -3.5? Is it a -4? Whatever, right? They're so wired into thinking that, even they don't really know what it means. And I explained to them, your child's doing ortho K now. Before we start ortho K, when we're just prescribing glasses, just measuring, we measure the prescription in a unit of measurement called a diopter. And when you have a -2 or a -325 or what have you, that unit of measurement is a diopter. Well, what we really care about is the length of the eye, because nobody's ever had a retinal detachment because their glasses were too thick. And that's what you get. You get thicker lenses when you have a higher prescription. They get a retinal detachment because their eye grew too long, their retina got too thin. And then things don't always hold up as well. So now we measure their level of nearsightedness for your child in millimeters, and that's measuring every time they come in. And it is a rewiring of their thinking. And for that reason, I try to cover it in detail at the consult visit. And then I try to cover it very briefly at basically every single visit. It's the first thing I look at, the first thing I discuss before I even talk about their vision. And I say, and as we've discussed before, this is super important and this is why. And when I do that consistently, then after about 3 or 4 visits, they come in more asking about the axial length as opposed to, the other things that might matter, but they don't matter as much.
Right. So you've got them not trained, but educated and ready to be focused on those important parts around axial length.
And you mentioned the technology there, Matthew. There's a lot of good pieces of technology, and I don't think that one's necessarily way superior to the other, but I certainly do love the one I use. And the one I use, it presents that in a graph of their percentile, right? So it makes it really easy to explain how stable they are, because me saying your child's axial length is 23.75 means nothing. It barely means anything to me because I don't remember them. Some people do. I don't remember the ratios all that great, but they do understand that their child went to the pediatrician and they expressed their height and weight in terms of a percentile. And that tells them where they are compared to their peers. And so if their child is at a 92nd percentile for axial length, that's not a great thing in that case. And so they certainly understand, even if they don't understand what is an appropriate rate of growth for a 9-year-old Asian female, they do understand that if their percentile is not going up, that's a good thing. If their percentile comes in time after time and it's stable or flat, and sometimes we find that it decreases over time because we're controlling the axial length growth so well, they can see that on a graph and it means an awful lot to them.
Yeah. And I can speak to this directly very recently because as a brand new father, these percentiles were thrown at me constantly. And my line of thinking was, well, like higher number, good, right? Number go up,
Right.
number good, right? Paul, how do you use axial length in your consults? Are you, do you have visuals or are you hitting that information as hard as Dwight is?
Yeah, I would say so. Basically, to me, the axial length is the most unbiased piece of data that we have. There's really there's no subjectivity to it, and it's remarkably repeatable. That's the thing I find so interesting about it. You could put an unmolded person on an auto refractor, run it 10 times, and guess what? The diopters are going to be a little bit different each time. The K readings are going to be a little bit different each time. But you could put someone on a optical biometry, you could run that thing 10 times, and like within 100th of a millimeter, it's the same every single time. Like it is so remarkably, I trust it so much because there really is no subjectivity to it. And so for me, I use it as a way to explain, I think, the severity of the situation. So, because let's say somebody's only maybe a -1 at 11 years old, let's just say, but they have a flat cornea, 40K, but their axial length is 26.5. Like, I know in my mind, like, this is a gigantic eyeball that's just ready to explode, especially when you add the flat K reading into that scenario. Because remember, what axial length is actually measuring is front of the cornea to the surface of the retina. So that all that space is in the posterior chamber of an eye with a flat cornea like that. So I'm just like, that's when I say, we need to do, if we're going to do something, we need to do it now, because I have a feeling this -1 is going to be a -2 when this kid hits puberty, it could be a -4 or a -5. Like, it's coming. So I use it to really kind of understand the gravity of the situation that I'm dealing with.
Right. Matthew.
Well, I've really gotten into discussing annualized growth rates. So I am into the concept of your child is growing at a certain amount per year. And so once we get past the first, consultation, let's say we're 6 months, a year, et cetera, I will celebrate the reduction in the annualized growth rate because that's become such a big number for me. So I'll come in the room, I'm like, yeah, you are rocking, you've slowed way down. Here's what it should be, and here's what it is. And I'm so happy. But this is a thing I want to pose to both Dwight and Paul, because I'm super interested in this. And that is, I think axial length measurement, and for me, annualized growth rate, really helps speak to whether or not the child is doing what they're supposed to do. I just had a child last week who came in rocking and rolling, perfect topographies, perfect 20/20. They grew a ton, like 0.4 for the last 6 months for their annualized growth rate, right? And they were like 12 years old. So that's a pretty high number for 12 years old. I'm like, wow, if you are you wearing your retainers? Because yeah, boy, your topography looks good, but your growth rate is high. Well, I kicked over the stone and found out the kid wasn't wearing his retainers on the regular and was not telling mom and dad. So axial length measurement tells you what's really happening in the real world and not at that visit, right? Because that child had worn retainers consistently for 10 days and they came in looking at like a rock star, but they'd been skipping for the last 4 or 5 months a lot, apparently.
Yep.
And their growth rate was off the chart. So once I started digging in, I found out, and then they had to reveal to mom and dad they weren't wearing their retainers, and it was a whole discussion. I mean, axial length measurement, it is what it is. And if it's going in a way that doesn't make sense, it probably doesn't make sense. Have you guys seen anything like that? That can't be the only one, right?
I'm trying to think if I have.
Yeah, I don't remember a scenario exactly like that, but I mean, definitely we'll see worse results in general when they're sporadic. I guess typically when I've had sporadic kids, maybe they're not as smart as your kid and they don't start wearing it again before their exam. So their topography's jacked up too and they're undercorrected, right? It's one of those like, hey, you wear them every night? And there's like, of course. I'm just like,
Huh.
but are you? Looking back at the topography, and they're just like, yeah, I'm just like, but no. And, eventually it's kind of like there's a lot of data saying you're not. And then they'll kind of like sheepishly look at their parent. Well, no, maybe I'm wearing it like every third night or something like that. Or, a couple times a week. And then awkward conversation between them and the parent who paid a bunch of money for the treatment, right?
I want to talk about vision by design. So I want to take a brief break before we get into the next topic, because this is part of the Road to VBD 2025 series. The three of you are speaking at Vision by Design. I want us to just tell the audience a little bit about a lecture that either you're doing or that you're excited to attend at VBD. Paul, let's start with you. This can be either a lecture you're doing or a lecture that you can't wait to sit in on at the conference.
Well, I'll talk about the one that I'm doing since I'm not immediately right off the top of my head familiar with the full agenda. I haven't really absorbed all of it yet, but I just have such a good time on the stage with Matthew. I think we were pretty well off of each other, and we try to keep it, obviously as technical as it needs to be, but very approachable. I think we both try to come at it from I'm not going to tell you what to do, but we're going to tell you how we do things. And then you can try to adapt that to your own strategies, in your practice. So I don't really like to talk to, I kind of like to talk with the audience and kind of understand, where they're coming from. Like the best thing that happens when you're lecturing is when people actually ask questions, because if they do, it means they're paying attention. So Matthew and I are going to do our troubleshooting lecture in the part of the general session. And we've done it for the last couple of years. And I'd like to think each time we do it, it gets a little bit better. But it certainly is, it's a ball. And the attendees really seem to enjoy it, and they come up to us afterwards, and you might be on the stage for 50 minutes, but then you're sort of like in the hallway answering questions and talking to people that saw your lecture for the next 20 or 30 minutes. So it's really fun. I very much enjoy it. And I'll also be on, in boot camp with Dwight, doing kind of the basic intro stuff to Ortho-K, which I really love to do because there's so many people that are overwhelmed by the concept of Ortho-K. And so I like to be able to break it down to, like bite-sized pieces that are a little bit easier to digest. So, I'm not trying to toot my own horn. I'm just telling you what I'm excited to give to Vision by Design. And I always get a heck of a lot more than I give. So it's like a double win, for me. I'm really excited to go back, and it'll be nice to have it on the East Coast because we haven't done it there in a really long time.
Yeah, that's so true.
Yeah.
Dwight, How about yourself? A lecture either that you're doing or that you're going to be excited to attend?
Yeah, I'm very excited about the whole thing. One of the things I always tell people about Vision by Design and boot camp specifically, but the whole thing is the energy is unmatched. That's the biggest thing. You cannot get the same passion at another meeting, or at least not a meeting I've been to. And honestly, it's not close. So, you talk to these like-minded, really passionate people. The boot camp program is where I tend to always focus my energies. I was a boot camp attendee there about, gosh, probably 9 years ago. And for those that don't know, boot camp was the brainchild of Caroline Kalki. She was involved in the early days with a lot of the formative things, along with Carrie Herzberg, and Paul, you were there for that stuff. And she developed this concept of doing a boot camp because it is hard. It's intimidating to get started. And once you do get started, it's way too easy to do it wrong and then have to correct bad habits. And so it was so instrumental for me. And I gradually started getting more involved in doing lectures. And then I was really honored a couple of years ago when Dr. Kalki started wanting to have me as kind of a co-chair. So I kind of worked with her to create the content and the agenda and put the lectures together and things like that. And specifically, because it's on topic for what we're talking about, Matthew and I have one that we did last year that we're bringing back with some fun innovations this year called The Art of the Consult. Where it's a combination of providing some good general information and then kind of helping patients understand how to answer some of the tough questions. I think it's nice to hear a couple perspectives on how you might handle a potentially challenging question from a parent.
Yeah. I remember the early days of boot camp and Caroline putting the program together. I remember when it was a half a day and then a full day, and then we were lucky if we could get it into 2 days. Right. Now it's a bunch of days. It's almost the entire experience, which I think is awesome, for attendees. Matthew Martin, same question for you. Lecture you're giving or one that you're looking forward to attending?
Well, two I'm excited about. I'm excited about lecturing with Paul because he's amazing. And I'm excited about lecturing with Dwight because last year we had rave reviews for that lecture as well. The one I'm really excited about as well, on top of those two, is Momentum. So I'm doing a lecture called Momentum. And what Momentum is how to go from a person who does 1 fit to a person who does 10 fits a month. So it's about looking at yourself as a myopia management expert. It's about how to believe in the cause. It's about how to believe in your skill set and how to maximize your enthusiasm for generating referrals and for taking your practice from 1 fit every quarter to tons of fits, to fitting 3 or 4 patients a week, and for getting excited and for being the go-to person and referrals. And it's how to blow things up, and I'm super stoked about it because it's got a lot of marketing. It's got a lot of really neat stuff. I read a whole bunch of business books, and I steal some business ideas, and there's some things about how to internalize and how to make it a part of who you are and the DNA of your practice. So I'm super excited about that one. That's gonna be great.
Yeah, it's an outstanding event. And speaking of stealing ideas, I mean, it's not really stealing because, the people that go to Vision by Design are going to be your tribe and they're going to share information because they love to talk about this stuff. I'm sure you've already been able to tell by the way this podcast has been going so far. You can sign up for Vision by Design or look for more information at AAOMC.org. It's going to be October 22nd through the 25th. I'll be there. When you go to Vision by Design, walk up to Dwight Barnes, Matthew Martin, and Paul Levine, introduce yourself and say, I heard this episode on the Myopia Mindset, and talk with them because they are very open people, very knowledgeable people. And they've given so much of their free time and expertise to this event and to our industry as a whole. So definitely go to Vision by Design. All right. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me in this episode. I know I kept you guys late, so I appreciate you. Let's go through contact information. Once again, let's start with Matthew. How can people find out more information about you on the internet?
Yeah, you can reach out to me if you want that myopia management basics at Auburn Optical. That's AUBURN Optical at gmail.com.
All right. And Dwight?
Yep. The best way to reach me is Dr. Dwight. That's DRDWIGHT at CaryFamilyEyeCare.com, spelled C-A-R-Y is how we spell Cary in our town here in North Carolina. And also hit me up on LinkedIn is super easy as well.
And Paul?
plevineod@gmail.com.
And you can contact me at the podcast, myopiamindset@gmail.com. And if you've enjoyed what you've heard so far, please consider becoming a paid supporter of the podcast. It's $12 a month, which, if you think about it, is basically the cost of a cup of coffee each and every week. So I like to say, if you would buy me a cup of coffee to have awesome guests on like Matthew, Dwight, and Paul, then please consider doing so. You can do so at myopiamindset.com. Bonus content, early episodes, and a variety of things that we're cooking up in order to help our supporters on their path to success with myopia management. Gentlemen, thank you so much again. And for everybody else, we will see you at the next one.
Bye-bye.